The scorching Arizona sun beat down like a blacksmith's hammer on an anvil as Tessa Anderson struggled against the iron shackles binding her wrists to the weathered wooden post. Her throat burned with thirst, her once pristine blue dress now tattered and stained with dust and desperation. She had been left to die, abandoned by the very people who had promised her safe passage west. The year was 1878, and the promise of a new life had turned into a nightmare for the 22-year-old schoolteacher from Boston. 3 days ago, she'd been traveling with a wagon train headed to California. Now, she was alone, chained to a post outside an abandoned way station, left as payment to bandits who never returned to collect. Tessa's cracked lips parted as she tried to call for help, but her voice emerged as nothing more than a hoarse whisper. The distant sound of hoofbeats made her heart leap with both hope and fear. Someone was coming, but whether they would be her salvation or her executioner remained to be seen. A lone rider appeared on the horizon, the silhouette of man and horse wavering in the heat. Tessa blinked hard, unsure if what she was seeing was real or a mirage born of dehydration and desperation. The figure drew closer, and she could make out a tall man atop a chestnut gelding. His broad-brimmed hat cast his face in shadow, but she could see the glint of a star pinned to his leather vest. The stranger dismounted with fluid grace, his spurs jingling as his boots hit the dusty ground. He approached cautiously, one hand resting on the holstered revolver at his hip. "Madam?" His voice was deep, roughened by the elements. "You all right there?" Tessa tried to respond, but her parched throat betrayed her. The man quickly assessed her situation and reached for his canteen. "Here," he said, bringing the water to her lips. "Drink slow now." The water was lukewarm, but felt like heaven as it trickled down her throat. Tessa drank gratefully, careful not to gulp, despite her desperate thirst. "Thank you," she whispered when she could finally speak. "Please, help me." The man nodded, his eyes a startling blue against his sun-bronzed skin, scanning the area for threats before he turned his attention to her bindings. He drew a knife from his boot and worked at the ropes securing her chains to the post. "Name's Hayes Young," he said as he worked. "Deputy Marshal out of Tucson. What's your name, miss? And how'd you come to be in this predicament?" "Tessa Anderson," she replied, her voice stronger now. "I was traveling with the Miller wagon train. Bandits attacked 3 days ago. They killed the men who resisted and took what they wanted." She closed her eyes against the terrible memory. "The others. They left me here as payment. Said the bandits would be back for me." Hayes's expression hardened as he freed her from the post, though the manacles still circled her wrists. "Those weren't decent folk you were traveling with, Miss Anderson. No one leaves a woman to die like this, bandit payment or not." He helped her to her feet, but her legs, weak from days of standing, buckled beneath her. Hayes caught her against his chest, his strong arm steadying her. "Easy now," he murmured. "Let's get you somewhere safe. We can worry about those shackles once we're at my cabin." Tessa nodded weakly. "Where are we going?" "I've got a place about an hour's ride from here. Not much, but it's shelter and it's secure. We'll get you fixed up, then figure out what's next." He guided her toward his horse. "Can you ride?" "Yes," she said, though she wasn't entirely certain in her current state. Hayes helped her onto his horse before mounting behind her. His solid presence at her back was reassuring as he reached around her for the reins, creating a protective circle with his arms. "Hold on now," he said, and urged the horse forward. Tessa leaned back against him, too exhausted and relieved to maintain propriety. As they rode, she allowed herself to believe, for the first time in days, that she might survive. Hayes's cabin sat in a small clearing surrounded by pine trees, a modest but sturdy structure with a corral for horses and a small garden plot. He helped Tessa dismount and supported her as they walked to the door. Inside was simple but neat: a table with 2 chairs, a stone fireplace with cooking implements, a narrow bed in one corner, and shelves holding books, supplies, and what looked like legal documents. "Sit here," Hayes said, guiding her to a chair. He poured water from a pitcher into a cup and brought it to her. "Drink more, but still slow. Too much too fast will make you sick." Tessa nodded and sipped the cool water, while Hayes busied himself gathering tools to remove her shackles. He returned with a small metal file and a set of peculiar-looking picks. "These are locked," he observed, examining the manacles. Might take a bit of work. You know how to pick locks? Tessa asked, raising an eyebrow. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, revealing a dimple in his right cheek. Part of the job, madam. You'd be surprised what skills a lawman needs out here. He worked diligently, his large hands surprisingly dexterous as he manipulated the picks in the locks. Tessa watched his face as he concentrated the strong line of his jaw, the furrow between his brows, the way his dark hair curled slightly where it met the nape of his neck. There, he said at last, as the first shackle fell away. Tessa winced as she saw the raw, bloody skin beneath. Hayes frowned. We'll need to clean those wounds. He worked on the second manacle while Tessa flexed her freed wrist, grimacing at the pain, but grateful to be released. When both shackles lay on the table, Hayes fetched a basin of water and some clean cloths. This might sting, he warned as he gently began to clean the abrasions. Tessa bit her lip, but remained stoic. Thank you, Mr. Young. I don't know how to repay your kindness. Hayes, he corrected, and there's no debt. Couldn't leave you out there. Nevertheless, I'm grateful. She studied him as he tended to her wounds. You said you're a deputy marshal? What were you doing out this way? Tracking a gang that's been hitting settlements and way stations, following reports of 3 men who matched the description of the Keller brothers. He glanced up at her. Might be the same ones who attacked your wagon train. I didn't hear any names, Tessa said, but there were 3 of them leading the group. One had a scar across his face. Hayes nodded. That'd be Frank Keller, mean as a rattlesnake and twice as dangerous. He finished wrapping clean cloths around her wrists and stood. You need to eat something and then rest. Tomorrow we can talk about getting you somewhere safe. Tessa watched as he moved efficiently around the small cabin, preparing a simple meal of beans, dried beef, and biscuits. Despite her hunger, she only managed a few bites before exhaustion overtook her. I'm sorry, she murmured, her eyelids growing heavy. I can't seem to... You need sleep more than food right now, Hayes said, taking the plate from her hands. Take the bed. I'll make up a pallet by the fire. Tessa wanted to protest, but she was too tired to argue. Hayes helped her to the bed, and she was asleep almost before her head touched the pillow. When she woke, sunlight was streaming through the cabin's single window. For a moment, Tessa was disoriented. Then the events of the previous day came rushing back. She sat up gingerly, her body aching from her ordeal. Hayes was nowhere to be seen, but a clean dress was laid out at the foot of the bed, along with a basin of water and a bar of soap. Tessa rose and examined the dress, a simple calico, but clean and whole. It would be large on her frame, but far better than her ruined garment. She washed as best she could and changed, grateful for the fresh clothing. Just as she finished, the cabin door opened, and Hayes entered carrying an armful of firewood. You're awake, he said, his eyes taking in her appearance. Found that dress in a trunk. Belonged to my sister when she stayed with me last year. Thought it might fit you well enough until we can get you something proper. It's perfect, thank you. Tessa smoothed the fabric. I feel human again. Hayes nodded, setting the wood beside the fireplace. There's coffee on the stove, and I caught some fish for breakfast. How are you feeling? Better, Tessa said, though her wrists still throbbed and her muscles ached. Alive, thanks to you. They ate breakfast together, and as Tessa's strength returned, so did her questions about her rescuer. How long have you been a marshal? She asked. 5 years, Hayes replied. Was a scout for the cavalry before that, and did some ranching. Never quite found my place until I pinned on the badge. And your family? Parents passed on. Sister married a storekeeper in Tucson. I see her when duty takes me there. He studied her over his coffee cup. What about you, Miss Anderson? What brought you west from Boston? Tessa looked down at her plate. I was a teacher there, but circumstances changed. I answered an advertisement for teachers needed in California. She hesitated. There was also a man in Boston. His attentions became troublesome after I refused his proposal. Hayes's expression darkened. He hurt you? Not physically, Tessa assured him, but his persistence was becoming concerning. He had influence in the city. It seemed prudent to make a fresh start elsewhere. Hayes nodded, understanding in his eyes. The West offers that, at least, a chance to begin again. If one survives the journey, Tessa added wryly. A smile flickered across Hayes's face. Well, You're proving resilient so far. After breakfast, Hayes showed Tessa around the property. The cabin sat in a small valley with mountains visible in the distance, a stream running nearby, providing fresh water. "It's beautiful here," Tessa remarked as they walked along the stream bank. "It is," Hayes agreed. "Peaceful, different from the towns where I usually work. Do you come here often?" "When I can, between assignments, or when I need to think." He skipped a stone across the water. "Town life doesn't suit me much." Tessa watched the ripples spread across the surface of the stream. "What will happen now? With me, I mean." Hayes straightened, considering her question. "Nearest town is Silver Creek, about a day's ride from here. They've got a hotel where you could stay while you decide your next steps. I could escort you there tomorrow, if you're feeling strong enough." The thought of being left alone in an unfamiliar town sent a shiver through Tessa. "And then, you'll continue tracking these Keller brothers?" "That's my job," he said simply. "Of course." Tessa tried to keep the disappointment from her voice. What had she expected? That this man would abandon his duties to help a stranger? They returned to the cabin, and Hayes showed her how to use his rifle in case she needed to defend herself while he checked his trap lines. The weight of the Winchester was unfamiliar in Tessa's hands, but she listened carefully to his instructions. "I won't be gone long," he promised. "Just keep the door barred." Alone in the cabin, Tessa explored her temporary sanctuary. Hayes's few possessions told her little about the man, some books on law and history. A tin-type photograph of a young woman who must be his sister, a carved wooden horse that looked handmade. She ran her fingers over the simple furniture, wondering about the life of this solitary lawman who had saved her. When Hayes returned with 2 rabbits for their supper, he found Tessa attempting to tend the small garden outside the cabin. "You don't need to work," he said, frowning. "You're still recovering." "I want to help," she insisted. "I can't just sit idle while you do everything." Hayes studied her for a moment, then nodded. "All right, but don't push yourself too hard." They worked together preparing the meal, and Tessa found herself watching Hayes's hands strong and capable whether he was skinning rabbits or stoking the fire. His movements were economical, nothing wasted. A man accustomed to self-reliance. As they ate, Tessa asked about his work as a marshal, and Hayes spoke of the challenges of bringing law to the territories. His stories were matter-of-fact rather than boastful, and Tessa sensed that for every tale he shared, there were others too dark or dangerous to speak of. "It must be lonely," she observed as they finished their meal. "This life." Hayes was quiet for a moment. "Sometimes, but there's a certain freedom in it too." "Freedom can be its own kind of loneliness," Tessa said softly. Their eyes met across the table, and something unspoken passed between them. Hayes looked away first, rising to clear the plates. "We should turn in early if we're heading to Silver Creek tomorrow," he said, his tone businesslike once more. That night, as Tessa lay in Hayes's bed while he slept on his pallet near the fire, she listened to the unfamiliar sounds of the wilderness, the call of a distant coyote, the rustle of wind in the pines, the occasional snap of the dying fire. She thought about the journey ahead, about what awaited her in Silver Creek, and about the man who had saved her life. Sleep was a long time coming. The ride to Silver Creek the next day was arduous but uneventful. Tessa rode behind Hayes on his gelding, her arms wrapped around his waist for balance. The solid warmth of him was reassuring, and she found herself reluctant to reach their destination. Silver Creek proved to be a small but thriving settlement, with a main street flanked by wooden buildings, a general store, a saloon, a modest hotel, and various other businesses. People paused in their activities to watch as Hayes and Tessa rode in, curious about the newcomers. Hayes dismounted outside the hotel and helped Tessa down. "Let's get you settled," he said, guiding her up the steps with a hand at the small of her back. The hotel proprietress, Mrs. Wilkins, was a plump, efficient woman who eyed Tessa's borrowed dress and bandaged wrists with frank curiosity, but asked no questions when Hayes requested a room. "How long will the lady be staying?" Mrs. Wilkins inquired as she handed over a key. Hayes looked to Tessa, who realized she had no answer. "I'm not certain yet," she said. "A few days at least." "And how will you be paying?" The woman's tone was polite but firm. Tessa froze. Her money had been taken by the bandits, along with all her possessions. Before she could speak, Hayes placed some coins on the counter. "That should cover a week," he said. "And meals." "Hayes, no," Tessa protested. "You've done enough. I can't accept—" "You can repay me when you're on your feet again," he interrupted. "Consider it a loan." Mrs. Wilkins counted the money and nodded, satisfied. "Room 3, top of the stairs, breakfast at 7, dinner at 6. Bathhouse is out back if you want hot water." Tessa's room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking the main street. Hayes set her few belongings, the clothes he'd provided, and some supplies on the bed. "There's a telegraph office down the street," he said. "You could send word to whoever's expecting you in California, let them know what happened." "No one is expecting me specifically," Tessa admitted. "I was to present myself to the school board upon arrival. They won't miss me." Hayes frowned. "What about your family back east? Should they be notified?" Tessa shook her head. "My parents are gone. I have an aunt in Philadelphia, but we're not close." She managed a smile. "There's no one to miss me, Deputy Marshal. I'm quite alone in the world." Something flickered in Hayes's eyes. Recognition, perhaps, of a kindred solitude. "Well, you're not alone now. You're in Silver Creek, and folks here look after their own." "I'm hardly one of their own," Tessa pointed out. "I'm just passing through." "Maybe." Hayes moved to the door. "I need to speak with the sheriff while I'm in town. See if there's been any word about the Kellers. I'll come back before I leave." After he'd gone, Tessa sat on the edge of the bed, feeling strangely bereft. In the span of just 2 days, she had come to rely on Hayes's steady presence. The thought of him riding away filled her with an unexpected sense of loss. She unpacked her meager belongings, then used the basin to freshen up before venturing downstairs. The hotel's small dining room was empty at this hour, but Mrs. Wilkins appeared from the kitchen when she heard Tessa's footsteps. "Thought you might want some tea," the woman said, setting down a tray with a pot and cup. "You look like you've had a hard journey." "Thank you," Tessa said, grateful for the kindness. "It's been challenging." Mrs. Wilkins poured the tea and sat across from her. "Marshal Young is a good man," she said without preamble. "One of the best. If he's helping you, you're fortunate." "Yes, I know," Tessa agreed. "He saved my life." The older woman nodded. "He does that. Saved this town a time or two as well." She studied Tessa with shrewd eyes. "You planning to stay in Silver Creek?" "I don't know yet," Tessa admitted. "I was headed to California to teach." Well, our schoolteacher left us last month, married a cattle baron from Texas." Mrs. Wilkins sipped her own tea. "Town council's been looking for a replacement. Might be worth talking to Mayor Bennett if you're interested." Tessa's heart quickened at the prospect. I would be. Very much so." Mrs. Wilkins smiled. "Thought as much. You have that look about you, educated, proper. We could use someone like you here." The idea of staying in Silver Creek, of building a new life in this small frontier town, took root in Tessa's mind. It wasn't California, but perhaps it was where she was meant to be. When Hayes returned that evening, Tessa was waiting for him in the hotel lobby. His expression brightened when he saw her, though he quickly schooled his features back to their usual calm. "You look better," he observed. "Getting your strength back?" "Yes, thank you," she said. "Mrs. Wilkins has been very kind, and she mentioned something interesting. The town needs a teacher." Hayes nodded. "I heard. Think you might be interested?" "I am," Tessa said. "Very much so. It seems providential almost, to find exactly what I was seeking, but here instead of California." A small smile touched Hayes's lips. "The West has a way of leading folks where they need to be, even if it's not where they thought they were going." "Does that mean you think I should stay?" Tessa asked, searching his face. "It's not my place to say," Hayes replied. But something in his tone suggested he might not be opposed to the idea. "But Silver Creek is a good town, with good people. Worse places to put down roots." Tessa took a deep breath. "I think I'll speak with the mayor tomorrow, see if the position might be suitable." "Good," Hayes said. He hesitated, then added, "I need to leave at first light. Got word that the Kellers were spotted near the Dragoon Mountains." Tessa's heart sank, but she kept her expression neutral. "Of course. You have your duty." "I'll be back," Hayes said, his blue eyes holding hers. "Once this business is finished, to check on you." "I'd like that," Tessa said softly. They stood in silence for a moment, neither quite ready to say goodbye. Finally, Hayes reached into his pocket and withdrew something small that glinted in the lamplight. "I want you to have this," he said, holding out his deputy marshal's badge. "Not to keep its federal property after all, but to hold until I return for it." Tessa took the star, feeling its weight in her palm. "Are you sure? Won't you need it?" "Got another," he said with a shrug. "This one's special to me. First badge I ever wore. Thought it might serve as a promise that I'll come back." The gesture touched Tessa deeply. "I'll keep it safe," she promised, closing her fingers around the badge. Hayes nodded, satisfied. "Get some rest, Miss Anderson. Tomorrow's the start of your new life in Silver Creek." "Tessa," she corrected him with a smile. "If you're entrusting me with your badge, I think you can use my given name." "Tessa," he repeated, and the sound of her name on his lips sent a pleasant shiver through her. "Good night, then. Good night, Hayes, and be careful." He touched the brim of his hat and turned to go. At the door, he paused and looked back, as if committing her to memory, then stepped out into the gathering dusk. Tessa returned to her room, the badge clasped in her hand like a talisman. As she prepared for bed, she placed it carefully on the nightstand, where she could see it tangible proof of Hayes's promise to return. The next morning, Tessa met with Mayor Bennett, a portly man with a booming voice and an impressive mustache. He was delighted to find a qualified teacher had literally appeared on their doorstep and offered her the position on the spot. "School's been closed 3 weeks now," he explained as he showed her the small schoolhouse at the edge of town. "Got 22 children of various ages needing education. Pays not much, but there's a room attached to the back of the building where the teacher lives. Comes furnished, such as it is." Tessa examined the schoolroom with its rows of wooden desks and the small chalkboard at the front. The attached living quarters were indeed modest: a bed, a table with 2 chairs, a small stove, and a bookshelf, but it was clean and would be hers alone. "It's perfect," she told the mayor. "When can I start? How's Monday sound? Gives you a few days to settle in and prepare." And so, Tessa Anderson became the new schoolteacher of Silver Creek. The work was challenging but rewarding. Her students ranged from 6-year-old beginners to teenagers preparing for adult life, all with varying levels of prior education. Some of the older boys were reluctant to take instruction from a city woman, as they called her. But Tessa's firm yet kind approach soon won them over. The townspeople welcomed her warmly, especially once they learned how she had come to be in Silver Creek. Her ordeal at the hands of bandits and her rescue by Deputy Marshal Young became something of a local legend, embellished with each retelling until Hayes was single-handedly fighting off a dozen outlaws to save her. Every night before she slept, Tessa would hold Hayes's badge, wondering where he was, whether he was safe, if he was thinking of her as she thought of him. 2 weeks passed, then 3, with no word. On a crisp autumn morning in early October, Tessa was writing arithmetic problems on the chalkboard when she heard a commotion outside. Her students rushed to the windows before she could stop them. "It's Marshal Young!" exclaimed Tommy Jenkins, one of her oldest pupils. "And he's got prisoners!" Tessa's heart leapt as she moved to the window. Sure enough, Hayes was riding down the main street, leading 3 men on horseback, their hands bound to their saddle horns. A crowd was gathering to witness the spectacle. "Children," Tessa said, fighting to keep her voice steady, "please return to your seats and complete the problems on the board. I'll be back in a moment." She stepped outside just as Hayes and his prisoners reached the sheriff's office. He looked trail-worn and tired, a few days' growth of beard shadowing his jaw, but he was whole and alive. Relief flooded through her. Sheriff Miller emerged from his office, and deputies moved to take charge of the prisoners. Tessa watched as the men were led inside, recognizing one with a scar across his face. Frank Keller, the man who had left her to die. Hayes spoke briefly with the sheriff, then turned and saw her standing there. For a moment, he seemed frozen in place. Then he handed his horse's reins to a deputy and walked toward her, his spurs jingling with each step. "Miss Anderson," he said as he reached her, removing his hat. "You're looking well." "As are you, Deputy Marshal," she replied, though the shadows under his eyes and the new cut on his cheekbones suggested otherwise. "You captured the Kellers." "All 3, he confirmed. "Won't be troubling anyone for a long while." They stood looking at each other, aware of curious eyes watching from all directions. Tessa wanted nothing more than to throw her arms around him, to assure herself that he was really there, but propriety held her back. "I have your badge," she said instead. "Safe, as promised." A smile touched Hayes's lips. "I'll collect it when you're not busy with your students." From the schoolhouse doorway, little Sarah Miller called, "Miss Anderson, Tommy's eating paste again." Tessa sighed. "Duty calls, it seems, for both of us." Hayes nodded. "I'll come by this evening, if that's all right, after I've cleaned up and rested a bit." "I'll be waiting," Tessa said, then hurried back to her classroom, aware of Hayes's eyes on her as she went. The rest of the school day passed in a blur of anticipation. When the children had gone home, Tessa hurried to her quarters to wash and change. She put on her best dress, a blue calico that Mrs. Jenkins had helped her make, and arranged her hair with unusual care. Hayes arrived just after sundown, freshly bathed and shaved, wearing clean clothes rather than his trail-worn garb. He held his hat in his hands as she invited him in, looking almost nervous. "I brought you something," he said, placing a small package wrapped in brown paper on her table. "Not much, but I thought you might like it." Tessa unwrapped the gift to find a beautiful leather-bound journal. "Hayes, it's lovely," she said, running her fingers over the soft cover. "Thought you might like to keep notes for your teaching," he said, "or just write your thoughts. Lady like you probably has a lot of important things to say." The thoughtfulness of the gift touched Tessa deeply. "Thank you. I shall treasure it." She went to her dresser and retrieved his badge from the drawer where she kept it. "And this is yours, as promised." Hayes took the badge, his fingers brushing hers. "Been thinking about this," he said, looking down at the star, "and what it means." "What does it mean?" Tessa asked softly. "Duty, responsibility." He met her eyes. "Promise." Her heart quickened. "And have you kept all your promises, Deputy Marshal?" "I try to," he said. "Said I'd come back for this badge, and for you." The directness of his words took Tessa's breath away. "For me?" Hayes set his hat and the badge on the table and took a step closer to her. "Couldn't stop thinking about you out there. Every night under the stars, wondering if you'd settled in here, if you were happy, if you ever thought about me." "I did," Tessa admitted. "Every day." He reached for her hands, holding them gently in his larger ones. "I'm not a man of many words, Tessa. Never been good at fancy speeches. But these weeks away made me realize something I think I knew the moment I found you." "What's that?" she asked, hardly daring to breathe. "That I don't want to leave again. Not without knowing if there might be something here. Between us." His eyes searched hers. "I know it's fast, and maybe improper. You're an educated lady, and I'm just a lawman with a cabin in the woods. But I care for you, Tessa. More than I thought possible after so short a time." Tessa felt tears spring to her eyes. "It's not improper at all," she whispered. "Not when I feel the same way." Hayes' expression brightened with hope. "You do?" "From the moment you gave me water when I was dying of thirst. From the moment you showed me kindness when I had known only cruelty." She squeezed his hands. "You gave me your water. And then your name asked me to keep your badge safe. How could I not come to care for you?" Hayes released her hands only to cup her face gently between his palms. "May I kiss you, Miss Anderson?" "Please do, Deputy Marshal Young," she replied with a smile. His lips met hers in a kiss that was gentle yet urgent, tender yet passionate. Tessa felt herself melting against him, her hands finding their way to his shoulders as his arms encircled her waist. When they finally parted, both were breathless. "I should go," Hayes said reluctantly. "People will talk." "Let them," Tessa said, but she knew he was right. Her position as the town's teacher required a certain propriety. "Will I see you tomorrow?" "And the day after," he promised, "for as long as you'll have me." In the days that followed, Hayes became a regular visitor to the schoolhouse. He would arrive after classes ended, sometimes bringing small gifts, wildflowers, a book he thought she might enjoy, fresh honey from a beekeeper outside town. They would walk together along Silver Creek streets, or sit talking on the bench outside the school. The townspeople watched their courtship with approving eyes. The match seemed perfect to them, their respected teacher and the heroic lawman who had brought the Keller brothers to justice. If the couple's romance had begun under unusual circumstances, that only added to its appeal. A month after Hayes's return, he invited Tessa to visit his cabin for the day. Mrs. Wilkins agreed to serve as chaperone, lending respectability to the excursion. As they rode together through the autumn landscape, Tessa found herself falling in love, not just with Hayes, but with the wild beauty of the territory. "I've been thinking," Hayes said as they neared his property, "about my work as a marshal." "Oh?" Tessa tried to keep her tone neutral, though the subject had been weighing on her mind. His duties took him away, sometimes into dangerous situations, and the thought of losing him was almost unbearable. "Thinking it might be time for a change," he continued. "Sheriff Miller mentioned he could use a deputy here in Silver Creek. Wouldn't pay as much as my federal badge, but I'd be in one place." He glanced at her. "Have roots somewhere." Hope blossomed in Tessa's heart. "You'd consider that? Staying in Silver Creek?" "If I had reason enough to stay," he said meaningfully. They reached the cabin, and Mrs. Wilkins busied herself preparing lunch while Hayes showed Tessa the improvements he'd made to the property. "Built that smokehouse last spring," he said, pointing to a small structure near the garden, "and expanded the corral, thinking about adding a room to the cabin next." "It's a wonderful place," Tessa said sincerely. "So peaceful." Hayes nodded. "Always thought it could be more, though. A real home, not just a place to rest between assignments." They walked to the edge of the stream where they had stood months before, when Tessa was still recovering from her ordeal. The water flowed clear and cold over smooth stones, the sound a soothing melody. "This is where I first knew," Hayes said quietly. "Knew what?" "That I'd found something I wasn't looking for." He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "Tessa, I know we haven't known each other long, but I've lived enough to recognize what matters. And you matter to me more than anything." Tessa's heart pounded as Hayes reached into his pocket and withdrew a small ring with a modest pearl set in silver. "It was my mother's," he said. "Not fancy, but she always said it represented something pure and lasting." He took a deep breath. "Tessa Anderson, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Joy surged through Tessa, bright and overwhelming. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, Hayes, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into his arms, his kiss conveying all the love and promise of their future together. When they finally parted, both were laughing and tearful. "Mrs. Wilkins is probably watching from the window," Tessa whispered, glancing toward the cabin. "Let her," Hayes said with a grin. "Give her something good to tell the town when we get back." They were married 2 weeks later in Silver Creek's small church, with the entire town turning out for the celebration. Tessa wore a cream-colored dress that the women of the community had helped her make, and Hayes looked handsome and slightly uncomfortable in a new black suit. Mayor Bennett performed the ceremony, his booming voice filling the church as Hayes and Tessa exchanged vows. When they were pronounced husband and wife, Hayes's kiss was restrained but held the promise of the passion to come. The townspeople hosted a reception at the hotel, with music and dancing lasting well into the evening. As the celebration wound down, Hayes led Tessa away from the crowd. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Young?" he asked, his voice low and intimate. The name sent a thrill through Tessa. "Home to the cabin?" "For tonight," Hayes said. "I've spoken with the school board. They're building us a house closer to town, so you won't have far to go to the school. But I thought for our honeymoon, we might want the privacy of the cabin." Tessa leaned into his embrace. "That sounds perfect." They rode out together under a sky filled with stars, Hayes's arm secure around Tessa's waist as they shared his horse. The autumn night was cool but clear, and Tessa felt a sense of rightness, of coming full circle. "Hard to believe," she mused as the cabin came into view, "that just a few months ago, I was chained to a post, certain I would die. And now you're here, safe, with me." Hayes tightened his arm around her. "Life has a strange way of working out sometimes." "Indeed it does," Tessa agreed as they stopped before the cabin. Hayes dismounted and reached up to help her down, but instead of setting her on her feet, he swept her into his arms. "What are you doing?" she laughed. "Carrying my bride across the threshold," he said with a smile. "It's tradition, isn't it?" He carried her into the cabin, which Tessa saw had been transformed. Fresh flowers stood in a vase on the table, new curtains hung at the windows, and the bed was made up with what looked like new linens. "When did you do all this?" she asked, amazed. Had some help from your friends in town, Hayes admitted. The ladies were quite insistent that our wedding night be special. Tessa blushed at the thought of the townswomen preparing their bridal chamber. Hayes set her gently on her feet and lit the lamps, casting a warm glow throughout the cabin. "Are you hungry? Thirsty?" he asked, suddenly seeming as nervous as she felt. "No," Tessa said softly. "Just happy to be here, with you." Hayes moved to stand before her, reaching up to remove the pins from her hair, letting it fall in waves around her shoulders. "You're beautiful, Tessa," he murmured. "I still can't believe you're my wife." "Believe it," she whispered, placing her hands on his chest. "I'm yours, Hayes Young, now and always." Their kiss deepened, and Tessa surrendered to the love she had found in the most unexpected of places, a love born in the harsh wilderness, tempered by adversity, and now flourishing in the promise of a shared life. Spring came to Silver Creek, bringing with it new growth and new beginnings. Tessa and Hayes moved into their new house at the edge of town, a comfortable 4-room dwelling within easy walking distance of both the school and the sheriff's office, where Hayes now served as deputy. Their life together settled into a pleasant rhythm. Mornings were busy with preparations for their respective duties. Hayes would kiss Tessa goodbye at the door before heading to his office, and she would walk to the schoolhouse to prepare for her students. Evenings were their time together, quiet meals, shared books, planning for their future. Weekends often found them at the cabin, which they maintained as a retreat from town life. Hayes continued to make improvements to the property, building furniture for their home in town, and teaching Tessa how to shoot and ride with confidence. "A woman needs to be able to defend herself out here," he insisted as he adjusted her grip on his rifle, "especially a woman married to a lawman." Tessa had proven an apt pupil, much to Hayes's pride. She still preferred her books and teaching to frontier skills, but she embraced the challenge of adapting to her new life. On a warm evening in late May, as they sat on the porch of their home watching the sunset, Tessa took Hayes's hand and placed it on her stomach. "I have news," she said, her eyes shining. Hayes looked at her in confusion, then understanding dawned. Are we?" Tessa nodded. "Dr. Wilson confirmed it yesterday. We're going to have a baby around Christmas time." Joy transformed Hayes's face as he pulled her into a gentle embrace. "A baby," he whispered against her hair. "Our baby." "Are you happy?" Tessa asked, though his reaction left little doubt. "Happier than I ever thought possible," he assured her. "You've given me everything, Tessa. A home, a purpose, and now, a family." As her pregnancy progressed, Tessa continued teaching, though the school board hired an assistant to help with her duties. Hayes became even more protective, checking on her between his rounds and escorting her to and from the schoolhouse each day. "I'm perfectly capable of walking 200 yards alone," Tessa teased him one morning, as he insisted on accompanying her despite being due at a meeting with the sheriff. "Humor me," Hayes said, patting her growing belly. "I'm looking after both my treasures." The baby arrived on Christmas Eve, a healthy boy with his father's blue eyes and a strong set of lungs that announced his arrival to the whole town. They named him Thomas Hayes Young, honoring both Tessa's father and his own. "He's perfect," Hayes whispered as he held his son for the first time, awe and terror mingling in his expression. "He is," Tessa agreed, exhausted but radiant. "And so are you, my love." As the years passed, the Young family grew and flourished. A daughter, Emma, joined them 2 years after Thomas, followed by another son, William, 3 years later. Hayes eventually became sheriff when Miller retired, and Tessa continued teaching until Emma was born, after which she focused on raising their children and tutoring students who needed extra help. The cabin in the woods became their summer home, a place where the children could run free and learn the ways of the wilderness under their father's watchful eye. Hayes taught them to fish and hunt, to read tracks and navigate by the stars, while Tessa ensured they received a proper education and developed a love of books and learning. "Best of both worlds," Hayes would say proudly as they watched their children playing in the stream, where he and Tessa had once stood as virtual strangers. City smarts and frontier skills. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Hayes presented Tessa with a special gift, a framed Deputy Marshal's badge, the very one he had given her to hold when he went to capture the Kellers. "To remind us how it all began," he said as she unwrapped it, with water, a name, and a promise. Tessa's eyes filled with tears as she touched the star. I remember being so afraid when you rode away that first time, afraid you wouldn't come back. I'll always come back to you, Hayes said, taking her in his arms, no matter what. And he kept that promise through the years, through droughts and harsh winters, through illness and hardship, through the joys of watching their children grow and the sorrows that life inevitably brings. Their love, born in desperation and kindness, deepened with each passing season into something enduring and unbreakable. When their oldest grandchild, a curious girl with Tessa's spirit and Hayes's eyes, asked how they had met, they would exchange a look, remembering that fateful day. Your grandmother was in trouble, Hayes would begin, chained to a post in the burning sun. And your grandfather saved me, Tessa would continue. He gave me his water when I was dying of thirst. And then I gave her my name, Hayes would finish with a wink at his wife. The best gift I ever received, Tessa would say, reaching for his hand across the years and miles they had traveled together. And in the telling and retelling, their story became legend in Silver Creek, a testament to the unexpected ways love could be found on the frontier, and how a simple act of kindness could lead to a lifetime of happiness. The schoolteacher from Boston and the deputy marshal who rescued her had found in each other not just salvation, but a true home, one built on courage, compassion, and an enduring love that had begun with water, a name, and a promise kept.